to our last pitch for today. It's to La Rochelle, still the boys, EIGSI.
Very much. No, it's okay. Well, hi everyone. We are François and
Florent.
And we are going to present you our speech for European digital independence in terms of politics. So let's begin. Well, first, if we all can agree with something, is that today's Europe is now facing important challenges. The EU has more than ever to be relevant. The EU has more than ever to be relevant on sustainable development, and in this case, in the digital sector. The coronavirus crisis has shown the importance of being more independent in the medical sector.
The same issue is coming up with the digital. How can we be more independent from GAFAM and Eastern countries for our digital applications?
Well, first, to be able to provide innovation and solution, we need to create the condition of their success. Indeed, even if Europe is able to train good engineers and technicians, the last decades have proven themselves to be the decades of Europe's deindustrialization. And the major problem about it is that we are now dependent on East Asia and North America for our electronic components production. If we want to be more independent from these countries, we may have to reindustrialize the EU and so be able to produce all the components we need for European digital independence by creating the condition for it, with, for example, taxes exemption or special grants, but also sanctions and nationalization of Europe's strategic companies.
But when we talk about digital, we think data. And all this data we use need to be stored in a data center. And if we take a look about the proportion of data centers in the world, we can observe that Microsoft, most of them are owned by Microsoft. That's why to take the control of data storage and to be more independent, leading countries such as France or Germany must develop new data centers. For example, thanks to its seaboard, the France could develop a subsea data center. It will allow to make two things. First, to be fully in line with the European Green Deal, project, by cooling the data center without using an air conditioning system. And secondly, maybe the most important thing, it will allow for Europe to have their own data center. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really cool, and I really like the words like deindustrialization and reindustrialization. Now, which kind of hardware are we talking about? You mentioned data centers. Are you focusing on data centers, or do we also need to include other hardware?
Well, it's quite a global plan. Like we sort of data centers, but it's more like a global plan. Like we spoke about semiconductors and microchips this afternoon, and I know that Europe has a big plan with 42 billion euros invested in it. But yeah, it's like being able, our project is not about being competitive and in a subject of economic growth, but it's to be independent from other countries, for example. It's something very global, and it's also something that has to see with sustainable development in general. It's not always about economics, it's also about social and environmental. Like it's how we are going to be able to have data centers in some countries, in France, for example, because the price of the watt hour is very low compared to other countries, such as, for example, Germany. It's like 29 cents the kilowatt hour. In France, it's 17 cents the kilowatt hour. So it's how we are going to be independent and how we are going to have work to be social, have workers that work with good working condition, with good salary. It's also about that. It's also about something social. It's because the sustainable development is about economic, social, and environmental problem. And in this way, we have like less transport if we produce all our microchips, or a big part of our microchips, and our semiconductors. And I know that the goal of Europe in 2030 is to have like 20% of the production of semiconductor in Europe. And that's an important goal, but some commissioner of the European Commission are dedicated to have a bigger budget. And like, for example, 150 billion euros budget, for example. It's some commissioners of some places of the commissions are for it. So it's about like investing a lot of money, well, money from the ECB, the European Central Bank, but it's quite costly also. But it's like really how we ensure an economical, a social, and an environmental independence in Europe.
Yeah. And it's a huge mission. I mean, how long will it take to be sufficiently re-industrialized? Are we talking about 5 years or 30 years?
Yeah, it's more about 30 years. Yeah, sure. Like a global project, a global projection we had. It's not a very clear project like some other with very touchable things, you know. Like it's more of a society, of an
It's
idea
a
of
plan.
society.
No, I really support your goals and your passion, but I'd be worried not about the time, but also about the costs and where you want to take this. And maybe a very small story as a provocation. So a famous German bike constructor Rose said we want to build a European bike. So they were looking for someone who built bike frames, and they couldn't find anyone, so they tried it to do themselves with partners, and they failed. Yeah, so you would have to do a lot of investments in a lot of places. And how far would you like to take this? I mean, should we become the kind of new North Korea where we say we are super self-sufficient, we don't do many things, but the ones are really homegrown? Or how do you allocate resources, and how far do you take this? That's really my worry at this moment.
We don't want to be North Korea. I think we all agree here. But we have the idea of planification. It's a big planification. And so if we want someone to buy a bike, we need to have someone who knows how to buy a bike. And we need to have someone who can buy a bike made by a French, a German per person, because the costs are also lower in, like, when you go to China, for example. When you have a big bike production in China, it's going to be like less expensive. So we want people to have the possibility to buy a bike, a French bike, a German bike, a Spanish bike, an Italian bike. We want them to do that too. And it's also a question of power of buying, if I can say so. And so maybe we need to like it's quite difficult because the European political system is quite liberal, but maybe sometime in the like libre-échange in the like some accord we have with other countries, maybe we should, like with the Canada, for example, with China, we should say, okay, this business is ours, and we are not gonna use it, and we are not gonna use your production for our country, for example. So it's like, yeah, it's a question of sovereignty and independence.
Europe first. But
Just if I
would
can
lead
add something.
maybe on a macroeconomic point of view, from my point of view, at least for Europe, it would lead to a loss of wealth, wouldn't it? Because why do we produce in other countries? Because it's cheaper in the end. So what is the macroeconomic rationale behind? But maybe you wanted to have an answer first.
No, it was just to answer about the costs, because we thought about subsea data center, because most of the energy is on this current data center are only to power the data center, but with a subsea data center, with the for example this renewable energy, we will reduce the cost of the energy for cooling the data center. So I think it will be reduce a little bit the cost and the investment.
I'm really intrigued by the idea of the subsea data center. And what are we going to do with countries like Austria that don't have a coastline? How are they going to participate? And France has a long coastline compared to other countries in the EU. So you made a point about distribution, the responsibilities, and everyone has to provide the coastline or specific parts of the coastline. But there are countries that don't have coastlines, and other countries have less coastlines. So how are you going to take up that?
Lakes.
Yeah. We are in Europe,
Warm
we
lakes.
share the energy, so why not to share data and the accessibility for the data centers? This is the goal of the Europe, to share.
Cool, thank you.
So